He came back carrying a toy nobody would stop for. A German shepherd 3 years old stood in the Phoenix heat like a gate made of muscle and warning, his black and tan coat dusty, his amber eyes locked on me as if he'd been waiting for one person to finally listen. Late summer in Phoenix, Arizona. The air wavered above the sidewalk. The asphalt glittered like broken glass. Cars rolled past. Nobody slowed down for one dog and one filthy teddy bear. The shepherd didn't wag when I stepped closer. He lowered his head over the bare shoulders, tight paws braced like he was pinning down a secret that could run away. Across the bear's belly in smeared black marker, one word stared up at me. Help! A low sound crawled out of the dog's chest, not a bark, something colder like a warning wrapped in a prayer. He snapped once at the empty air beside my knee, not to bite me, but to stop me from walking away like everyone else. And if you're watching this right now, please don't be the car that keeps going. Subscribe to the channel so more people hear these rescue stories, because the next help might not have a voice. And sharing this could be the reason someone gets saved in time. Phoenix baked under a late summer sun, the air shimmering above cracked sidewalks as heat clung to everything like a curse. Jack Carter moved through that glare like a man trying to outwalk his own shadows. At 35, he carried the hard angles of a life sharpened by war, a square jaw shadowed with short, stubborn stubble, a faint scar that cut through his right eyebrow and eyes the color of stormwater, quiet, watchful, tired in a way sleep never fixed. He wasn't tall in a movie hero way, but he was built like a door that had been slammed too many times and refused to break. Broad shoulders, thick forearms, a steady weight in his steps. The neighborhood knew him as the guy who kept his lawn trimmed and his voice low, a polite nod to the mail carrier, a brief morning to the older couple 2 houses down. They didn't know what he used to do. They didn't need to. Jack had spent years learning how to disappear, and even in civilian life he still practiced the art like a prayer. Some men came home from the Navy with medals and stories. Jack came home with a careful routine and a mind that scanned exits without asking permission. On the leash beside him, Rex paced with that same disciplined quiet, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a powerful black and tan coat that caught the sun in copper flashes. Rex's ears stood sharp as arrowheads, and his muzzle, dark and noble, always seemed to be tasting the air for the next truth. His eyes were amber and intelligent, the kind that made people laugh and say, "He looks like he understands English," and Jack would half smile because Rex did understand more than most humans. Rex had been a working dog before Jack adopted him, and you could see it in the way he walked, confident, but not careless, always a step ahead, always ready. Where Jack's body carried old damage, Rex carried purpose, and that purpose had slowly stitched Jack back together in places therapy never reached. They took the same route every evening, not because Jack loved routine, but because routine loved him. It was a fence he built around his thoughts so they couldn't stampede. Past the corner store that smelled of fryer oil and cheap coffee, past the vacant lot where tumbleweeds gathered like gossip, past the chain-link fence, tagged with sun-faded graffiti. On a day like this, the world felt loud without making any sound. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Rex stopped near the vacant lot, nose-dipping, shoulders stiffening. Jack's hand tightened on the leash without thinking. That was the thing about old training, it lived under your skin, waiting. "What is it?" Jack murmured, his voice calm, but his chest already tightening with the familiar pinch of alertness. Rex didn't bark. He didn't whine. He stared, then tugged once, firm, respectful, like a soldier requesting permission to move. Jack followed, stepping off the sidewalk into brittle weeds that snapped like dry bones. Rex disappeared behind a warped billboard support for a second, and Jack's irritation flickered, half parent, half commander. "Rex, don't..." Then Rex came back and the irritation died. Rex carried a stuffed teddy bear in his mouth. It was filthy, the fur once cream-colored but now smeared gray with dust and oil. One button eye was missing, the remaining one scratched and dull. The bear's belly had a strip of fabric stitched across it like a crude bandage. Jack exhaled a short laugh, the kind that surprised even him. "Really," he said, trying to let humor pull the moment into safety. "A treasure hunt. You picked the ugliest prize in the kingdom, buddy." Rex didn't drop it like a dog proud of a silly find. He held it carefully, almost reverently, as if his teeth were hands. His body was rigid, tail low, ears forward. Jack's laugh faded into a thin line. Then he saw the letters. Help. 4 black, uneven strokes, thick with dried marker, written across the bear's belly like a wound. Not a child's playful scrawl. The letters leaned crowded, as if whoever wrote them had been rushed, scared, maybe shaking. Jack felt the air change inside his lungs. Heat still pressed down from the sky, but something cold slid under his ribs. He crouched, keeping his movement slow. His palms were open, empty, the way you approached a nervous animal or an explosive. "Rex," he said quietly, using the tone that meant listen. Rex's gaze locked on Jack's face, unblinking, his eyes bright with intent. Jack reached toward the bear, then stopped when Rex's grip tightened. Not aggression, protection. Jack's mind ran through possibilities like cards in a dealer's hand, a prank, a lost toy, a sick joke. Phoenix had no shortage of cruel humor. But the letters weren't funny. They were desperate. The bear smelled wrong sweat, dirt, and faintly bleach, the way bad places tried to pretend they were clean. Jack's swallowed throat suddenly dry. He had promised himself he was done with missions. Done with doors and shadows and people who didn't deserve mercy. He had promised himself a quiet life, a life where the loudest thing was Rex's nails on the tile. Yet here was Rex standing in the weeds, holding a message like a courier from the underworld. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears, and he hated how familiar it felt, how part of him woke up eager and furious like an old god rising from a sealed temple. "Okay," Jack whispered, more to himself than to the dog. "Okay. Show me." Rex turned immediately, as if he'd been waiting for those words. He trotted forward with the bear still clamped gently in his jaws, weaving through the weeds toward the industrial edge of the neighborhood where the sun bounced off metal roofs. Jack followed each step heavier than the last because he knew the truth about signs like this. They didn't appear for people who wanted peace. They appeared for people who could no longer pretend not to see. And somewhere ahead, beyond the heat and the dust, someone had written "help" because their voice wasn't enough. Jack Carter followed Rex past the edge of the neighborhood, where lawns surrendered to gravel and heat shimmered over dented warehouse roofs. The stuffed bear swung from Rex's jaws like a grim little banner, its dirty fur brushing the dog's chest with each purposeful step. Jack kept the leash loose but ready, his posture relaxed in the way trained men, fake relaxation, shoulders down, breath, steady eyes doing the work. Every few seconds he checked reflections in car windows, listened for footsteps behind them, watched for the unnatural stillness that meant someone was watching back. Rex didn't look around. He looked forward, ears pricked, tail low, moving with a quiet certainty that made Jack's skin prickle. That word "help" on the bear's belly kept flashing in his mind like a warning light that wouldn't shut off. He tried to tell himself it could be a prank, a discarded prop, some neighborhood kid's dark joke, but the marker strokes were too heavy, too rushed. And the smell, faint bleach under sweat and dust, didn't belong to play. They reached a strip of industrial lots where chain-link fences leaned under sun-bleached signs. A delivery truck rattled by its driver, barely glancing at the man and dog walking along the curb. Jack's mouth tasted metallic the way it used to before breaching a door. He hated that his body remembered. He hated, too, that a small part of him felt useful again. Rex slowed at a vacant lot half-choked with brittle weeds and broken pallets. Beyond it sat a low warehouse with no clear business name, just a peeled-off sticker where a logo used to be. The building looked ordinary in the way bad places often did, ordinary enough to be ignored. Rex angled left away from the main entrance toward a side alley where the shadows were sharper. Jack's gaze tracked the alley, a security camera dome, old and cloudy. A padlocked gate with rust like dried blood, an air vent humming low. The hum was too steady, too constant, as if it was trying to cover other sounds. Rex stopped at the fence and pressed his nose to the metal. He inhaled once deep, then made a sound Jack hadn't heard from him in months. A low, vibrating warning that lived in the chest, not the throat. Jack crouched beside him and finally took the bear from his mouth, careful, slow, treating it like it could explode into grief. The fabric was stiff with grime. The HELP letters were smeared, but legible. Jack turned the bear over and saw the crude stitching across its belly like a hurried bandage. His fingertips traced the seam and felt nothing yet, but he wasn't looking for a pocket this time. He was looking for context. The alley air carried layers, oil rust, sun-baked trash, and underneath it, that chemical clean. Too clean. A lie. Jack rose and stepped closer to the gate. Through the chain link, he could see a narrow service yard behind the warehouse, stacked crates, a dumpster, a dark tarp draped over something long. Nothing moved. Yet Rex's muscles stayed tight, as if his eyes were seeing more than Jack's. Jack forced his breath slow. He had learned long ago that panic was noisy and noise got people killed. He pulled his phone out, screen dimmed against the sun, and dialed 911 with a thumb that didn't shake. "Emergency services," the operator answered. "This is Jack Carter," he said quietly. He kept his voice steady, giving the address as best he could from the nearest cross street. "Possible animal abuse, possible unlawful confinement. I need an officer dispatched." The operator asked questions and Jack answered without drama because drama wasted time. When she asked if he was in immediate danger, Jack's eyes flicked to Rex. Rex's ears twitched toward the warehouse wall as if he'd caught something small. Then Jack heard a faint sound, not quite a bark, more like a muffled whine pressed through metal and distance, a sound that made the hair rise on Jack's arms. "There are animals inside," Jack said. "I can hear them." He ended the call with instructions to stay safe, and he almost laughed at the advice. Safe was a luxury. The whine came again, thin as a thread. Rex pawed once at the dirt, restless, but he didn't lunge. He waited. Jack studied the gate. The padlock was old, the latch loose. He could break it, but breaking it would announce him. He scanned for another way like he always did. A gap under the fence where the earth had eroded. Not big enough for Jack, but maybe for Rex. Rex's chest was broad, but his head could fit if he angled right. Jack crouched, ran his fingers along the gap, feeling grit and sharp wire. Rex watched him, eyes bright, asking without words. Jack shook his head. "Not yet," he murmured. He needed eyes on the inside first. He moved down the fence line until he found a section where the chain link had been patched poorly. He pressed close, peering through. The service yard led to a side door, metal unmarked with a keypad. Above the door, the camera dome stared like a blind eye. Jack couldn't tell if it worked. Rex gave another low warning, then went still. That was when Jack noticed something on the ground near the dumpster, a fresh scuff trail, like something heavy had been dragged recently. And beside it, a single dog bowl medal dented empty, placed not carelessly but forgotten in haste. Jack's stomach tightened. People didn't forget bowls if they cared. They forgot bowls when they were hiding what the bowl fed. He backed away from the fence, heart thudding with an old rhythm, and looked down at the bear again. Help wasn't a decoration. It was a direction. Rex nudged Jack's hand, then faced the alley as if pointing with his whole body. Jack swallowed, made a choice, and slipped the bear into his backpack like evidence. "All right," he whispered, voice rough. "We don't rush. We don't miss." Rex's tail flicked once controlled, and he led Jack deeper into the shadows toward the side door as the distant city noise faded, and the warehouse's steady hum grew louder like a heartbeat pretending to be a machine. Jack kept to the warehouse wall, using the building's shadow like a cloak. The sun still hammered the street out front, but back here, the air felt trapped, stale and strangely cold where the vent exhaled its steady mechanical breath. Rex moved at his left knee with the quiet focus of a partner who didn't need hand signals anymore. His ears stayed forward, catching everything. But his mouth was closed, no panting, no wasted sound. Jack could feel his own pulse trying to speed up, and he forced it down, the way he'd learned overseas. Breathe low, breathe slow, keep the mind sharper than the fear. He stopped at the side door with the keypad and didn't touch it. Touching was a decision that couldn't be undone. Instead, he studied the metal frame, the screws, the gaps, the way the door sat in the jamb. The lock looked newer than the building, a fresh piece of caution bolted onto old neglect. A camera dome hung above it like a cloudy eye. Jack angled his head, watching for the tiny red glow of an active feed. Nothing. That didn't mean it was dead, it meant it wasn't obvious. Rex's body tightened and his nose dipped toward the ground, following the scuff trail Jack had seen near the dumpster. The trail led to the tarp. Up close, it wasn't just draped, it was tied down with cords cinched like someone didn't want wind or curious eyes lifting it. Jack's jaw clenched. His old self wanted to rip it free and drag the truth into daylight. His wiser self knew truth could bite back. He crouched, fingertips finding the knot. He didn't pull. He listened. A faint scrape came from beneath the tarp, a soft movement like someone shifting on gravel. Rex let out a single low sound, not a bark, more like a warning sent through his chest. Jack froze, then spoke quietly into the darkness. "Hey," he said, "if you can hear me, don't make noise. I'm not here to hurt you." For a beat, there was nothing. Then a whisper, thin and rough as sandpaper. Don't open it, please." Jack's stomach dropped. That voice wasn't a dog. He eased back an inch so whoever was inside could see a slice of him through the tarp's edge. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name's Jack. I'm alone, except for my dog." Rex sat steady as a statue, eyes fixed on the tarp as if he could hold it in place with willpower. Another breath. "Emily," the voice said. "Emily Parker." The name came with a cough that sounded like bruised lungs. Jack pictured her without seeing her, young, scared, trying to disappear. He kept his tone even. "Emily, I called 911. Officers are on the way. Talk to me. Are you hurt?" Not broken," she whispered. And the attempt at humor in that answer made Jack's throat tighten, because humor was what people used when fear was too big to hold barehanded. "Just tied up, and they're inside. They'll hear if you—" Her words cut off as a muffled whine rose from the building, sharper now, closer, like the sound had traveled down a pipe straight into Jack's chest. Rex's ears flicked. He looked at Jack once, and in his amber eyes, Jack saw the question now. Jack exhaled. "Emily," he said, "I'm going to get you out from under that tarp." Slow. No sudden moves. He slid his fingers under the cord and loosened it gently, letting the tarp sag just enough for air and light. A face appeared in the gap. Female, early 20s, pale under a film of grime. Emily Parker had dark blonde hair tangled into a loose, sweaty knot at her nape and freckles scattered across her cheeks like spilled cinnamon. One cheek was swollen purple and her lower lip was split, but her eyes, gray-blue and fierce, tracked Jack with a sharp intelligence that refused to give up. She was petite, all elbows and trembling strength, wearing a faded green tank top and jeans stained at the knees. Zip ties bit into her wrists. Jack's hands moved with practiced care, cutting the ties without nicking skin. Emily sucked in a shaky breath like she'd been holding it for days. Rex stepped forward and sniffed her, once gentle, then leaned back as if giving her space. Emily's eyes landed on Rex, and something cracked in her expression. Relief, grief, gratitude, all tangled together. "He came," she whispered, voice breaking. Jack frowned. "You know him?" Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Not his name. But I saw him outside the fence. He kept coming back, like he was on duty." She laughed once, a small, painful sound. "I had nothing else. They took my phone. They took everything." Her gaze flicked to Jack's backpack where the teddy bear was hidden. "Did he bring it?" Jack's fingers went cold. He pulled the bear out slowly, showing it like evidence in court. The word "help" stared between them. Emily's eyes filled instantly. "I wrote that," she said. "I found the bear in a box of junk. I wrote 'help' because my voice wouldn't carry past the walls." She shivered, then forced herself steady. "I shoved it through a gap in the fence when no one was looking. I handed it to him. I told him—" Her voice collapsed into a whisper. "I told him to find someone who would listen." Jack looked down at Rex, and the dog's tail moved, once restrained, as if he accepted praise but didn't need it. Jack felt something hot behind his eyes and hated it because tears were messy and missions were clean. Yet this wasn't a mission anymore. It was a mess made by cruel hands. Emily gripped Jack's forearm with trembling fingers. "There are more dogs," she said, urgency sharpening every word. "A whole group. They keep them in cages. They do it on purpose. They punish them. They're waiting for buyers. And when they don't sell fast enough, they hurt them." Jack's jaw locked. The old rage in him rose like a mythic beast, but he kept his voice level because Emily needed a rock, not a storm. "How many?" he asked. Emily's eyes flicked toward the warehouse door, terrified of what was behind it. "I don't know. 8, 10, maybe more." Another muffled whine seeped out, followed by the faint clank of metal. Rex's head snapped toward the sound muscles, coiling. Sirens were still far away. Time was a thin rope. Jack slid the bear back into his pack and took Emily's hand, guiding her into the deepest shadow behind the dumpster. "Stay here," he murmured. "Stay quiet. When the police arrive, you wave. You tell them everything." Emily shook her head, tears streaking clean lines through dirt. "Don't go in," she pleaded. "They have locks. They have—" Jack held her gaze. "I'm not going in blind," he promised. "But I'm also not walking away." He set his palm briefly on Rex's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, then turned toward the side door again. Rex moved with him, the two of them slipping back into that old, dangerous teamwork. Only now the reason wasn't orders or flags. It was a girl under a tarp, a teddy bear that said "help." and the thin, suffering sounds behind steel. Jack and Rex returned to the side door like two shadows refusing to be swallowed. The keypad stared back at Jack, clean plastic on old metal, a modern lock, pretending it could erase whatever lived behind it. Jack didn't touch the numbers. He didn't want a failed code attempt to scream an alarm. Instead, he listened, head angled, breath held, until he caught it again, the faint clink of metal, the soft scrape of claws, and the kind of silence that only comes from creatures who have learned that noise makes pain arrive faster. Rex's hackles lifted along his shoulders, but he stayed quiet, his amber eyes locked on the seam of the door as if he could see through it. Jack's mind ran its cold checklist. Police were coming, but sirens were still distant. Emily was hidden, injured, terrified. Inside were dogs maybe dying. Jack had promised he wouldn't go in blind, and he meant it. So he made the only move that wasn't bravado. He gathered information. He knelt beside the doorframe, fingers brushing the lower hinge, feeling vibration through metal. The vent above the door hummed louder, here masking sound. Good for whoever built this place. Bad for whoever needed help. Jack shifted to the wall and followed the vent line with his eyes until he found a service panel held by 4 screws, new screws, too clean, not rusted like the rest. Someone had been here recently. Someone cared enough to keep the machine breathing. Jack pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket. It wasn't a weapon, it was a habit. He worked on the screws with slow, controlled turns, pausing every few seconds to listen for footsteps or a voice. Rex stood over him like a silent guard body blocking the alley from view. When the panel came loose, warm air sighed out, carrying that same bleach-sweet lie and something worse beneath it, urine fear infection. Jack swallowed hard and forced his face to stay calm. He wasn't doing this for himself. He slid his phone into the gap camera on flashlight, dimmed, and angled it inside. The screen showed a narrow duct, dust-coated, leading toward darkness. He pushed the phone farther, inch by inch, letting the camera peek around a bend. Then he saw movement, not a person, dogs. A row of cages just at the edge of the camera's view, stacked like prison bunks. A dog's face appeared between bars for a half second, a brown and black shepherd mix, maybe eyes, 2 bright ribs showing. Then the face vanished, as if it had learned not to hope when it saw light. Jack's throat tightened. Rex let out a sound so low it barely existed, but Jack felt it in his bones. A sudden slam echoed somewhere inside, metal on metal, and a voice followed, male and impatient. "Shut up! You want water, you behave." The voice wasn't shouting, not yet. It didn't need to. Cruelty didn't always scream. Sometimes it spoke like paperwork. Jack pulled the phone back and slid the panel into place loosely, leaving 2 screws out so he could reopen it fast if needed. He stood rolling his shoulders as if the movement could roll off rage. But rage stuck. Rage was adhesive. He backed away from the door and signaled Rex with 2 fingers, "Stay close, stay quiet." Rex obeyed, but his eyes never softened. Jack moved to the dumpster's edge where he could see the service yard and the alley mouth. In the far distance, the faintest wail of sirens finally reached him like a promise from a god who was always late. Good. Not enough. Jack checked the time and did quick math. Minutes mattered. He glanced toward Emily's hiding spot. She was still there, crouched low, hands wrapped around her knees, face pale, watching him like he was the last stable object in a shaking world. Jack raised a hand. "Stay." Emily nodded, swallowing tears. Jack's chest ached with a memory. He hated the feeling of leaving someone behind a wall while you moved toward danger, the guilt of knowing you might be wrong. He pushed it down. This time, he would not leave anyone behind for good. A car door slammed out front. Rex's ears snapped toward the sound. Jack froze. Footsteps approached, casual, unhurried, as if whoever was coming owned the air. A man rounded the corner into the service yard. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, stocky, sunburned, with a shaved head that gleamed under the alley light. A rough goatee framed his mouth like a permanent sneer. He wore a sleeveless gray shirt that showed thick forearms marked with faded tattoos, names, symbols, things meant to look tough. He carried a clipboard like it was a shield and a set of keys that clinked with each step. The keys were the loudest thing about him, which told Jack everything this man wasn't used to fear. He was used to causing it. He didn't see Jack at first. He saw Rex. His eyes narrowed, then widened with irritation. "Hey, get out of here," he snapped, stepping forward. Jack stepped out from behind the dumpster body between the man and the dog. Voice calm as a drawn line. "Wrong turn," Jack said. Tone polite enough to be believable, flat enough to be warning. The man's gaze traveled up Jack's frame, reading the posture, the stillness, the scar. His confidence flickered just a blink, then returned in a harder shape. "This is private property," he said, keys jangling as he lifted them. "You got 2 seconds." Jack's heart stayed steady. He didn't want to fight. He wanted time. "My dog ran after a toy." Jack lied smoothly because truth got people killed in places like this. "We're leaving." Rex stood perfectly still, but his lips curled a fraction, showing one white tooth. The man noticed, his face twisted. "That dog bites, I'll—" Sirens grew louder, suddenly close enough to be real. The man's head snapped toward the street and something sharp passed across his eyes, panic. In that instant, Jack saw the crack in him. Not bravery, not power, just a man who knew he'd been caught doing something unforgivable. He spun toward the side door, keys already in hand. Rex lunged half a step, restrained by Jack's leash grip. Jack moved fast, not charging, not attacking, just intercepting like a door closing. He planted himself between the man and the keypad, voice dropping to something colder. "Don't," Jack said. The man hesitated, eyes darting, then shoved Jack's shoulder with sudden anger. Jack didn't stumble. He absorbed it like a wall. Behind them, the warehouse gave another muffled whine, and the sound turned Jack's restraint into steel. The siren screamed closer. The man's breathing went ragged. He looked for an escape, and Jack knew what was coming next, a desperate move to lock everything down to hide the evidence with living bodies inside. Jack tightened his grip on the leash and held his ground, ready to keep that door from closing on the helpless again. The sirens arrived like a judgment that couldn't be bargained with. Red and blue light splashed across the warehouse wall, turning the alley into a moving stained glass window of consequence. The stocky man with the shaved head froze with his keys raised, caught between the side door and Jack Carter's unblinking stare. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might swing again, desperate enough to try anything. But the sound of boots and radios coming fast through the service yard snapped his courage into something smaller. He backed up, mouth twisting, and Jack didn't chase him. Jack didn't need to. He only needed the door not to close. "Phoenix Police," a voice called sharp and practiced. 2 officers rounded the corner with controlled speed, hands near holsters, eyes scanning. The first was a woman in her early 30s, Officer Maria Alvarez, medium height, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun that meant business-tan skin shining with sweat and a face that held both steel and empathy. She moved like someone who'd learned to stay calm in chaos, but her eyes flicked to Rex, immediately assessing the dog's posture before she assessed Jack's. The second officer. Officer Ethan Brooks was taller and leaner, maybe late 20s, with close-cropped sandy hair, a faint freckle line across his nose, and the kind of alertness that came from being new enough to still feel everything. "Step back," Alvarez ordered, voice firm. Jack raised both hands slowly, palms open. "I called," he said. "There are dogs inside. And a woman, Emily, she's behind the dumpster. She's hurt." Alvarez's expression tightened. "Brooks, get medics to the back. Now." Brooks nodded and spoke into his radio, voice clipped. The shaved head man tried to slip away toward the gate, but Alvarez's presence pinned him like gravity. "Sir, stop right there," she said. "Hands where I can see them." The keys clinked as his fingers trembled. Jack felt Rex's leash go taut for half a second, the dog's body vibrating with the urge to protect. Jack touched Rex's shoulder, one grounding press, and Rex settled, still watching, still ready. Alvarez approached Jack just enough to read him. "What's your name, Jack Carter?" he answered. "Former Navy." He didn't say SEAL. He hated how people's eyes changed when they heard that word, like it turned pain into entertainment. Alvarez didn't ask for more. She glanced at the side door. "How do we get in?" Jack nodded at the man's keys. "He has access." Alvarez's jaw hardened. She stepped toward the man and took the keys with a brisk motion that didn't invite argument. He started to protest, but the words died when she tightened the cuffs around his wrists. "You can explain it downtown," she said, tone flat. Then she signaled to 2 more officers arriving at the alley mouth. "Secure him. Clear the building." The side door opened with a beep and a click that sounded too polite for what it hid. The officers moved inside in a tight formation. For a moment, Jack stood outside with Rex breathing the hot metallic air and listening to the building swallow the sound of human voices. Then a thin cry rose from within, high, animal, desperate, and it was answered by another. Jack's throat closed. Rex's ears pinned forward, and he let out a low woof as if telling the voices, "Hold on. We're here." Brooks came back with paramedics, and that's when Jack saw Emily crawl out of the shadow behind the dumpster. She looked smaller in the flashing lights, early 20s. Petite, dark blonde hair falling loose around her face, now freckles stark against dirt, one cheek swollen and purple. But there was a stubborn brightness in her gray-blue eyes, the kind that refused to let fear have the final word. A paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she flinched at the first touch, then forced herself to breathe through it. When she saw Jack, she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears spilling without sound. Jack walked to her slowly so he wouldn't startle her. "You did the right thing," he said, voice rough. Emily shook her head, eyes darting to the door. The dog, she whispered, "Please." As if summoned by that word, the warehouse erupted with movement. Officers emerged carrying wire crates. Inside the first crate was a young shepherd mix, maybe a year-old black and brown coat, dull with neglect, ribs showing like the lines of a cruel poem. In the next was a small pit bull with a scarred ear and eyes that still tried to wag hope into existence. Another crate held a husky with fur matted and patchy, yet eyes bright with stubborn life. There were more, 8, 10, maybe 12, each one a different shape of suffering, each one trembling in the sudden air of freedom. Rex stood tall beside Jack, not barking, not lunging, just watching with a kind of solemn recognition as if he knew their language. One dog, a lanky tan mutt with a white blaze on his chest, pressed his nose through the crate bars toward Rex and let out a weak tail thump. Rex answered with a slow blink, calm as mercy. Emily's breath hitched when she saw them. "They were going to move them tonight," she said hoarsely. "They said if they didn't sell, they'd—" She couldn't finish. Jack didn't ask her to. He had heard enough. Maria Alvarez approached again, sweat on her brow but relief in her eyes. "We've got evidence," she said quietly to Jack. "Cage's records, the works. You just saved a lot of lives." Jack didn't feel heroic. He felt tired. He felt grateful that for once the ending wasn't a body bag. Emily looked down at Jack's backpack, and Jack understood without her asking. He unzipped it and pulled out the teddy bear. Under the emergency lights, the word help looked less like ink and more like a spell. Emily took it with both hands and laughed through tears, a sound that was half broken and half beautiful. "I thought it was gone," she said. Rex leaned forward and touched the bear gently with his nose, then rested his chin briefly on Emily's knee like a promise. Emily's shoulders shook, and she set her palm on Rex's head, fingers sinking into his thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered to him like she was speaking to a guardian spirit. Weeks later, the warehouse was quiet and padlocked by the city, its lies finally forced into daylight. The rescued dogs were placed with a reputable shelter, and Maria Alvarez called Jack to tell him 2 of them already had adoption applications. Emily, after medical care and statements, started volunteering at the shelter, her small frame gaining steadiness day by day as she learned that helping others could stitch a person back together. Jack visited once, telling himself it was just to check on Rex's friends, but he found himself staying longer, watching Emily kneel beside the crates with gentle hands and a brave smile. Rex trotted between them with the calm pride of a dog who knew his job was love. On the day Emily officially fostered the lanky tan mutt, now cleaned up, tail wagging like a flag, she tied a bandana around his neck and named him Sonny because she said she was done letting darkness pick the names. Jack stood there, sunlight in the shelter doorway, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something inside him unclench. The teddy bear sat on the counter behind the front desk, unwashed on purpose, the word help still visible, no longer a cry into emptiness, but a reminder that sometimes hope arrives on 4 paws carrying a filthy little message that changes everything. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or shining wings. Sometimes they come on 4 paws carrying a dirty little teddy bear with one desperate word, help, like a prayer stitched into fabric. And maybe that's how God works more often than we notice, not by erasing the darkness in one sweep, but by sending a small sign into an ordinary day and placing the courage to answer it inside a human heart. Jack thought he was done being called to anything bigger than a quiet walk in the heat, but Rex reminded him that heaven can tap you on the shoulder in the simplest ways, and when you choose compassion over comfort, you might become the answer to someone else's prayer. In everyday life, we pass signs all the time: a lost dog near a fence, a neighbor who suddenly grows quiet, a stranger whose eyes look like they've been carrying too much. Don't ignore them. Stop. Look twice. Offer help. Because love is rarely loud, but it is powerful, and sometimes God hides rescue inside small moments that ask us to be brave. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from, and do you believe Rex was sent at the perfect time? And if you want more true-to-the-heart rescue stories that restore faith in people, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your home, and place kindness in your path so that when a quiet help appears in your day, you'll have the strength to answer it with love.